After World War II, the United States transformed from a country where women participated in the workplace and Native Americans served in the military service to a country reverting back to the way it was. It was an era of conformity and tradition. In response to demands for Native American autonomy, the U.S. Congress took away government subsidies for Indian families, plunging many of them into instant poverty. States gained control over most Indian criminal and civil legal cases. In this environment, the federal government began removing Native American children from their impoverished homes and placing them for adoption in non-Indian families in order to assimilate them into the white culture. In 1958, the U.S. federal government, as a means to take responsibility for Native American children's welfare, enacted the Indian Adoption Program. But in actuality, this program ended up violating the civil rights of the very children the government thought they were helping. At the beginning of the Europeans' arrival onto the lands of North America, the white man tried to control the Native Americans who had resided on the continent for thousands of years. From the spread of disease to deliberate massacre, it was the intention of the white European immigrants to control, if not erase, the Native American population and culture. In the late 1800s, the U.S. federal government instituted a program called the Indian Boarding Schools, which removed Native American children from their homes and sent them to boarding schools that were a great distance from their homelands. The goal of these schools was to assimilate Indian children into the white culture and educate them in mainstream values. The children were forbidden to speak their native language or practice their cultural traditions. These Indian boarding schools educated the children so that they could be assimilated into white society upon adulthood and keep them from the influences of their traditional tribal customs. The era of the Indian boarding schools ended in the late 1920s. Similarly, the history of adoption in the United States is one of dishonesty and at times corruption. Adoption as a formal relationship was first legalized in the state of Massachusetts in 1851. A law was enacted stating that the adoption should be based on the child's welfare as opposed to the adult's interest. However, it wasn't until the 1940s that adoption became more accepted by society. The Child Welfare League of America organized a national conference in 1955 to announce that the era of special needs adoption had arrived, including transracial adoption. It was in this environment of openness to transracial adoptions coupled with the continued desire of the federal government to assimilate Native American children into the white culture that the Indian Adoption Program was initiated. The federal government believed it was taking responsibility for Native American children, many whom were living in impoverished conditions on the reservations, and providing them with the means to more opportunities in their lives. The administrators of the new program were committed to taking what they believed to be hard-to-adopt children and finding them loving homes. The Bureau of Indian Affairs and the U.S. Children's Bureau funded the Indian Adoption Program. They contracted with the Child Welfare League of America, a reputable private nonprofit that had organized networks through the states. The first director of the Indian Adoption Project was Arnold Leislow, who promoted the program as an example of a progressive world where a decrease in racial prejudice was paving the way for the adoption of Native American children. Leislow proudly declared upon the project's completion, quote, "One can no longer say that the Indian child is the forgotten child," unquote.
We didn't have power, we didn't have water and sewer, and we lived in a lot of poverty. One day, 2 station wagons pulled up, and they put all of us 6 girls in the station wagon and just drove away with us. I was about 7 years old. I don't even remember having been in a car before. I was one of those children taken and put into white foster homes, thinking that if we were put into these white foster homes, we would survive better.
The Indian Adoption Project lasted from 1958 through 1967. Officially, 395 Native American children from 16 states, primarily in the West, were placed with white families in states located in the East and Midwest. The project was followed by a similar program entitled the Adoption Resource Exchange of North America. That continued to place Native American children with white adopted parents through the early 1970s. 395 Indian children were adopted officially through the Indian Adoption Project, but over 11,000 Indian children were adopted between 1964 and 1976 through all adoptions and placed primarily with white families. The federal government's Indian adoption programs were terminated in the 1970s under increased pressure from the Native American community. The Red Power movement gained momentum in the 1970s and demanded that Indian nations have control over Native American children separated from their families. The U.S. Congressional Senate Committee of Indian Affairs held hearings on the impact of the Indian adoption programs. Some of the testimony based on the federal government's own studies reported that many of the children adopted through the program were happy and healthy young adults. David Franschel have followed many of the children adopted through the program and published his results in a report entitled Far from the Reservation in 1972. He noted that, quote, "The results of my research thus far support the view that the children were, by and large, very secure and obviously feeling loved and wanted in their adoptive homes," unquote. Other people testified, however, that many of the children were taken against the will of their birth parents, that the tribes had no knowledge that the children were being taken and there was no information where the children had gone, that the social workers were biased and did not find alternative living arrangements in the Native American community, and that the vast majority of the children were removed due to poverty, not abuse. During the hearings, many Native American activists challenged the notion that the Indian Adoption Project was a triumph of the federal government assuming responsibility for poor children and providing for equal opportunity, but rather denounced the program as one of a long line of genocidal policies toward the Native American community that violated the civil rights of their citizens. Congress responded to the testimony by passing the 1978 Indian Child Welfare Act and signed into law by President Carter. The act gave the Native American courts authority over child custody issues and stipulated that any Native American child up for adoption be placed with a member of the extended family or an Indian foster home. It made it extremely difficult for Native American children to be adopted by non-Native American families.
Over the years, where Indian children have basically come to discover that they are really tribal members, but they never knew that before, and the reason they didn't is because the Indian Child Welfare Act was not applied to them and did not protect them.
The social and emotional outcomes of the Indian Adoption Project were not evident until long after the ending of the program. Many adult adoptees found their lives disruptive, never fully fitting in with their adoptive families, but ignorant about their Native American culture. Some of the adult adoptees petitioned the court to unlock their adoption records and locate their Native American families, which resulted in happy reunions and in some cases ended up with the adult adoptees relocating to their tribe's reservations. Others were unable to connect on a cultural level with their Native American families. These stories have been captured in several books and on a blog dedicated to Native American adoptees.
All of us who had been taken as children from our homes, still as adults, didn't feel like we had a place where we belonged. It's impacted every aspect of my life. It's impacted my children and my grandchildren.
The response of the Native American community has been mixed. Some tribes have welcomed the adoptees back and created ceremonies to integrate the returning lost birds, the Native American symbol for adoptees, back to their tribes. The Lakota people have a song for the First Nation orphans, which is part of the Wiping the Tears ceremony for the adoptees. The story of Native American adoption is not over. Although the Indian Child Welfare Act has been the law for over 30 years, compliance with the law is uneven among the states, and questions remain how the act applies to the children who have a non-Indian parent. These issues will continue to be debated. One fact is for certain. Despite the federal government's good intention to take responsibility and provide a better life for the children, the unintended consequence was a violation of civil rights of the Native American children and their birth families that has had a lasting impact for many generations.